The beginning of sacrifice. Emma Brown stood by the window of their modest suburban home in Connecticut, watching as the early morning sun painted the sky in shades of soft pink and gold. The world outside was waking up, and so was her sense of both hope and duty, a daily ritual that had defined her for nearly a decade. Once, Emma had been an ambitious marketing executive, thriving on deadlines and creative brainstorming sessions. But everything changed after she met David Brown. David was full of dreams, a financial prodigy, passionate, driven, and magnetic in a way that made her believe anything was possible. Their whirlwind romance led to a swift marriage, powered by shared late-night talks about the future and promises whispered beneath the sheets. Emma believed in his vision so deeply that her own ambitions began to fade into the background, replaced instead by a fierce resolve to support her husband's rise. When their first son, Ethan, was born, Emma made the difficult decision to step away from her career. Just for a few years, she told herself. David's work was all-consuming. Someone needed to keep the household running, manage the bills, look after Ethan, and later, their daughter Lily. What began as a temporary pause turned into a permanent role. Emma became the calm at the center of their hectic lives, the planner, the caregiver, the emotional anchor. Those early years were a delicate dance of love and exhaustion. David spent long hours at the office, often returning with stories of close calls and small wins. Emma cooked late dinners, heard every detail, celebrated every victory, and soothed every disappointment. She was present at every school meeting, never missed a doctor's appointment, and kept their social life afloat with neighbors and in-laws. On weekends, she helped David rehearse for crucial presentations, editing his slides, suggesting lines, and building his confidence. Financially, they struggled for a while. David's first hedge fund collapsed, nearly wiping out their savings. Emma dipped into the small inheritance left by her parents without a word of complaint, reassuring David that they would recover. He was brilliant, after all. She sold treasured keepsakes, cut family expenses, and hunted for coupons, her pride quietly set aside for the sake of their shared dream. Despite the hardship, there were moments of tenderness that kept Emma going. Picnic lunches in the park, Ethan's laughter as he chased fireflies, and David's rare but heartfelt notes, "I couldn't do this without you," scrawled on kitchen post-its. In those moments, Emma felt visible, cherished, necessary. She tucked away her lingering dreams of a career behind carefully folded laundry and organized calendars. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was a partnership, one built on trust, sacrifice, and hope. Yet gradually, Emma began to notice the price of her devotion. Old friends from work drifted away. Professional contacts went cold. At gatherings, she was introduced as David's wife. When she did find time for herself, her skills felt rusty, her confidence brittle. Sometimes, as she sat beside Lily's crib in the quiet of the night, Emma wondered what might have been had she chosen differently. But even in those doubts, she never wavered in her support. Every ounce of love, energy, and ambition she once poured into herself was funneled wholly into her family, into David. After all, wasn't that what marriage was about? Sacrifice, faith, and building something greater together? Emma told herself again and again that the reward would come, that in supporting his rise, she was shaping the future not just for David, but for their children and for herself as well. In the warm glow of the kitchen, amid the routine chaos of family life, Emma clung fiercely to the hope that her sacrifices would one day be seen, valued, and returned in kind. The ladder of success. David's rise began as a quiet ripple, a congratulatory email here, a handshake at a networking event there. But it soon became a tidal wave neither of them could ignore. The modest suburban home that once felt full of dreams now echoed with the sounds of conference calls, and the sleepy rhythms of family life gradually gave way to the urgent tempo of ambition. In the beginning, the changes were subtle. David started coming home later, his tie loosened, but his eyes bright with adrenaline. He recounted deals brokered over power lunches in Midtown Manhattan and urgent meetings that stretched well past dusk. Emma listened intently as she set the table for dinner, masking her fatigue as pride. She told herself these were the sacrifices needed for his success and for the future they both envisioned. Soon, David's name appeared in industry newsletters and on glossy business magazines. He became a fixture at galas and fundraising dinners, often photographed next to other rising stars or city elites. There were new suits, carefully chosen watches, and a shiny car in the driveway, a far cry from their early years of frugality. With every achievement, David seemed to stand a little taller, his confidence swelling in proportion to his public image. Emma's days, meanwhile, grew lonelier. She bore the brunt of David's absence in countless unseen ways, fielding the children's questions about their father's whereabouts, attending piano recitals and parent-teacher conferences alone, sitting through long, silent dinners with only the muffled sounds of Ethan's video games and Lily's crayon scribbling for company. Invitations for Emma to join David at social events grew scarcer. When she did attend, she often felt like an accessory, smiling politely as conversations swirled around stock prices, market forecasts, and vacation homes in places she'd only read about. The wives she met compared jewelry, not stories of struggle, and Emma sometimes felt invisible amid the sheen of tailored gowns and manufactured laughs. She started volunteering at the local library, searching for purpose beyond the confines of her home, but even there found herself lost amid shelves heavy with books she no longer had time to read. Her friends from her marketing days reached out less and less, their text threads going silent as their worlds grew further apart. David noticed her distance only in passing. When he kissed her on the cheek before leaving for another business trip, his mind already drifted elsewhere. In the rare quiet moments they shared, he made vague promises. Soon things will settle down. Or, this is just the last push before everything pays off. Emma, somehow, still wanted to believe him. Their children adapted in their own ways. Ethan became quieter, finding solace in his technology and sports, while Lily clung more tightly to Emma, her questions about Daddy's schedule growing more pointed and insistent. Emma carried their confusion alongside her own, weaving explanations that tried to justify the growing gap in their family life. Holidays became milestones of absence. David emailed apologies from remote airports, called in just long enough to say hello, or sent expensive gifts to fill the silence. The home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt more like a waiting room, each day passing in anticipation of a return that never seemed to come. Still, Emma clung to the hope that everything was temporary. Late at night, after the children were asleep, she scrolled through articles celebrating David's ingenuity, clipping them for a scrapbook she had once hoped to show the kids. She told herself that these years of distance were an investment, just like everything else they'd sacrificed together. Yet beneath the surface of accomplishment, an uneasy current began to run. Emma could sense it in David's restless energy, in the way his smile no longer quite reached his eyes, in the fatigue he carried even as his career soared. For every new success, a keynote speech, a lucrative deal, another piece of their old intimacy slipped away, replaced by something glittering but cold. And so, Emma waited and watched, poised between pride and longing. As David climbed ever higher up the ladder of success, she wondered how far was too far to reach for a dream, and what, in the end, would be left if it slipped from their grasp. The first crack. It started slowly, imperceptible at first, like a hairline fracture in a pane of glass. Emma noticed it one crisp November evening as she was loading the dishwasher, the clink and splash of plates echoing through a kitchen that felt suddenly and uncomfortably vast. She realized that she didn't know if David would be coming home for dinner, or if another apologetic text would arrive after dark, citing an urgent meeting or drinks with new clients. There were new routines that excluded her entirely. David's phone, once left unattended on the kitchen counter, now never left his side. At night, he'd turn it face down, silencing notifications with a quick swipe of his thumb and a practiced, almost indifferent smile. He took more calls in the garage or on the back porch, his deep voice softened by closed doors. Emma told herself she trusted him, but the explanations always sounded just a shade too practiced, too convenient. The first undeniable sign arrived disguised as a mistake. One Saturday, as she was searching for her missing keys in David's car, Emma found a neatly folded cashmere scarf, the elegant embroidered initials not matching anyone she knew. The faintest trace of an unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air. A floral, foreign scent, nothing like her own. Her heart thudded, logic and fear wrestling in her mind. Maybe it belonged to a client, she reasoned. David met so many people these days. Still, the moment left an ache she couldn't massage away. Days later, she noticed changes in his appearance. David had always cared about looking sharp, but now it bordered on meticulous. New cologne, shirts pressed to perfection, a fresh haircut every week, and a gym bag that lived in his trunk. He dodged her questions about his schedule. Always on the move, always late for family dinners. "It's just a busy season," he'd insist, eyes flickering away from hers. "Big things are happening, Em. I have to be ready." Emma started to catalog the details. A lipstick smudge on the rim of a travel mug, a call history erased, laughter, soft and guarded, heard through his closed office door. He often seemed distracted, his gaze fixed on something distant, even as he sat across from her at the breakfast table. When she reached for his hand, he pulled away, almost unconsciously. Nights became the worst. Emma would lie in bed, wide awake, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, while David typed quietly on his laptop, or dozed with his phone clutched in his palm. The intimacy between them, once effortless, now felt manufactured. Her attempts at conversation answered with vague reassurances. Her touch met with flinching awkwardness. The loneliness, once merely a background hum, grew sharp and relentless. The children felt it too. Ethan asked why Daddy was never home for his baseball games. Lily began waking with nightmares, clinging to Emma, whispering fears about being left alone. Emma tried to soothe them, anchoring herself in the routines of motherhood, even as she grew more brittle inside. Her old friends, sensing something wrong, began to reach out with cautious invitations. A lunch here, a phone call there. But Emma found she had little to say. The vibrant, sharp-witted woman she had once been seemed to fade further with each day, replaced by someone who moved through her own home like a guest. Emma's mind, desperate for answers, started to sift through memories for clues. Had she missed something important? Had David's affections always been so fragile? Each recollection now wore a sinister edge. A text message sent at midnight, the hint of a smile playing at his lips as he scrolled his phone. Still, she hesitated to confront him. Part of her feared the answer, part of her clung to hope. The fracture widened with each passing day. Emma existed in a world of unasked questions and half-hearted explanations, haunted by a gnawing anxiety that wouldn't let her rest. The fortress she had built around their family, around her own certainty, now showed its first, unmistakable cracks. And for the first time, Emma wondered if love, Even love forged in sacrifice could survive the silence growing between them. The severance. The coldness arrived swiftly, like the first shock of winter. One morning, David sat across from Emma at the breakfast table, his eyes glued to an email on his phone, answering her questions with non-committal hums. The small rituals of their marriage, his request for her coffee, her squeezing his hand before work, the evening check-in, had vanished. They moved toward each other only out of habit, colliding in the hallway without speaking. At first, Emma clung to the hope that this was just another busy season, that the shadows in David's eyes were nothing more than fatigue. But it became impossible to ignore the way he seemed physically absent, even when home, his attention drifting, his presence more ghost than flesh. The final blow came on a Tuesday afternoon so ordinary it felt cruel in its normalcy. Emma was folding laundry in the den when the doorbell chimed. She opened the door to find a courier standing on the porch, holding an envelope and a clipboard. Her signature shaking as she scribbled her name, Emma accepted the envelope with a sinking dread. It was heavier than it should have been. Sliding her finger under the flap, she froze as she read. David arrived home late that evening, looking pristine and untouched by the day's events. Emma, her hands trembling, handed him the envelope. For a moment, she hoped he would deny it, call it a mistake, or at the very least, apologize for springing this on her through a third party. Instead, he only sighed and rubbed his forehead. "This is for the best, Emma. I think we both know it's over." His tone was flat, drained of emotion, as if he were negotiating a business deal and not ending almost 15 years of shared life. Emma felt the air sucked from her lungs. "You could have talked to me," she whispered, but David just shook his head. There's nothing left to say. She wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to hurl plates or cry until her tears ran dry. But her anger was numbed by shock. They sat in silence, the room suffocating in its stillness, until David quietly left to pack a small duffel bag. "I'll stay at a hotel for a while. My lawyer will be in touch." Days of disbelief. The following days blurred into a fog of disbelief. Emma moved through the house on autopilot, padding, lunches for the kids, feeding the dog, answering well-meaning texts with monosyllables. She told Ethan and Lily as gently as she could, watching their faces crumple in confusion and pain. Ethan grew silent, shutting himself in his room. Lily wet the bed and asked every night when Daddy was coming home. Emma slept on David's side of the bed, clinging to his scent on the pillow until even that faded. The silence of the house became oppressive. No more hurried footsteps at dawn. No deep voice booming from the home office. No laughter echoing down the hallways. Friends called. Her sister offered to fly in from Chicago. But Emma felt like a burden, too ashamed of the public unraveling of their perfect family facade. David's absences lengthened. Legal forms and emails began pouring in, requests for financial records, notices about court dates, dry official statements from his attorney. It became clear that David intended not only to sever ties, but to do so as expediently and painlessly, for himself, as possible. The new woman. It didn't take long for the rumors to reach her. First, gossipy emails from other moms at school. "Did you see David at Trattoria with a woman half his age?" Emma felt both rage and humiliation. David hadn't just replaced her as a wife. He had imported someone into the very heart of her family routine. The children's confusion deepened. Ethan muttered that Jessica wasn't Mom. Lily asked if she was supposed to be nice to Daddy's friend. Emma braced herself and reassured them with a steadiness she did not feel. Then, unmistakable confirmation. Jessica Miller, a junior analyst from David's firm, started popping up not only on his social media, but at pickup from the kids' after-school activities. Lily asked, "Is that Daddy's new friend?" Jessica was young, sleek, and briskly confident, her every movement efficient and controlled. Emma saw her through the tinted glass of David's new BMW one afternoon, Jessica's hand lingering on David's shoulder, her laughter ringing out through the open window. Spiraling downward. Emma's sense of self-worth plummeted further with each new blow. After years at home, her resume was anemic. Potential employers seemed uninterested in gaps filled with childcare and unpaid labor. Grocery bills piled up as provisions ran low. Grieving and humiliated, Emma was forced to sell her grandmother's engagement ring, a family heirloom, just to pay the mortgage lawyer's retainer. She soon realized the legal game was rigged against her. David had already secured a top-notch divorce attorney. His legal team was efficient, professional, and utterly ruthless. Her own modest lawyer advised her to temper expectations and prioritize stability for the children. Emma wanted not just stability, but justice, dignity, and above all, acknowledgement of her years of sacrifice. Nights became a roaring ache. Emma wandered the quiet house, fingers tracing the wallpaper she once picked out, the height marks etched into the closet molding, proof of lives grown together, now coming apart. She replayed her entire marriage, hunting for moments that might have foretold this betrayal. Had it all been a performance? Was she so easy to discard? Shame vied with fury in her chest, flickers of defiance. The shock morphed into anger. It was anger at David, anger at Jessica, anger at herself for believing so completely in the myth of the devoted wife. Emma sat at the kitchen table one night, surrounded by stacks of bills, and made herself a promise. She would not let her life be dismantled quietly. Whatever it took, she would not be vanquished by his betrayal. She would fight back for her children, for her place in the world, and for the years she could never recover. She poured herself a glass of wine and opened a fresh notebook. With trembling hands, she began to sketch out a plan, not just for survival, but for something more, a reckoning. Rebirth. The days of grief and rage passed, not with any thunderclap of resolve, but like leaves swept quietly into a corner. Emma sat in the kitchen bathed in afternoon light, her notebook open, a to-do list in careful block print, lawyer call, resume update, Ethan's science project. A single word, circled and underlined at the top, anchored her page. But rebuilding herself was far less tangible than rebuilding a house or even reconstructing an income. It was work performed in the mirror, in the silences at midnight, and in the choices she made every hour, not out of habit, but out of deliberate intention. Emma forced herself to face the new world to which she had been so violently exiled. There was no map for how to become whole again. She began with the simplest things. The first morning, she changed her routine. Instead of sitting with her phone and coffee in the hush before sunrise, scrolling through social media feeds that now seemed a battleground of perfect families and vacation photos, she put on running shoes and walked briskly through the crisp Connecticut air. At first, the rhythm of her sneakers on pavement revealed only the dull ache in her limbs and joints, a silent testament to years of neglect. By the third day, her breathing was easier. She noticed the warmth of sun on her face, the quiet presence of neighbors walking dogs, even the gentle smile from the woman who ran the bakery on Spring Street. These minute connections were not triumphs, but they were life, all hers, untethered from David's shadow. At home, Emma turned her attention to the clutter of her past. The closets filled with clothes never worn, the boxes of souvenirs from family trips, the framed wedding photograph she tucked quietly, with both care and relief, into the bottom drawer. She repainted Lily's room a sunny yellow, choosing the brush and color herself, marveling that for the first time in years, she was making decisions by and for herself. The solitude was not always kind. Some days felt as if she were wandering through her life like a stranger, encountering pieces of herself she could not recognize. The woman who once coordinated gala dinners and checked quarterly projections for David's business now burned toast in the morning, misplaced her keys twice a week, and sometimes cried in the shower after dropping off the kids. But there were moments of quiet pride in sending her resume out to old contacts, in calculating her own taxes, in learning to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen rather than waiting for help that would never materialize. Gradually, Emma reached out. She called Allison, the old college friend she hadn't seen in 6 years. Their first lunch was awkward. The conversation looped through surface topics: kids, holidays, recipes, dancing around the gaping changes in Emma's life. But the second coffee was easier, and by the third, Emma spoke honestly about the betrayal, the legal ordeal, and the vast emptiness that sometimes threatened to consume her. Allison listened, offered no easy fix, but reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand with steady warmth. "I always remembered you as the bravest of all of us," Allison said, smiling. "Maybe you just forgot for a while." Emboldened by that connection, Emma joined a local book club, signed up to volunteer at the community food pantry, and agreed to host Ethan's baseball team for a pizza night. At first, these efforts were punctuated by anxiety, a fear of being pitied, of being judged, of not being enough. But in those circles, Emma found other women with stories not so different from her own. The mother, in the midst of a painful breakup. The baker who was learning to speak English after years of isolation. Even the book club organizer who confessed with a laugh that she'd never actually finished the monthly novel. Through these interactions, Emma began collecting information, not just about her own interests and goals, but about David's new life. Conversations with neighbors, snippets overheard at school, and innocuous posts on Jessica Miller's social media painted a picture. David's professional world was glossy on the surface, but riddled with pressures. Rumors of compliance investigations at his firm, whispers of insider camaraderie that could unravel if the right strings were pulled. Jessica, too, was not untouchable. Her meteoric rise was resented by some and envied by many. Her promotion came with high expectations, but also made her a target. Emma did not act on this knowledge, yet. Instead, she quietly documented patterns, cataloged incidental remarks, and built a private dossier. Every evening, after the children went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote what she'd seen, what she'd learned, whose trust she'd gained. The work was slow, methodical, a different kind of diligence than she'd ever practiced before. This vigilance was not rooted solely in anger. It was fueled by a ferocious need for agency, the desire to no longer be the victim in her own story. Emma learned skills she'd once thought belonged to another world. She read books on financial independence, consulted with local entrepreneurs, and even attended a workshop for women re-entering the workforce. Her first attempt at an interview was a disaster. She stammered through questions, her palms damp and voice uneven. But she did not let it define her. She revised her resume again, practiced answering questions in the mirror, and accepted part-time work managing marketing for a local bakery. It wasn't the glamorous, high-powered job she once dreamed of, but it was her own, earned step by step. Inside, a transformation took root. She laughed more freely, unexpected laughter that burst out at dinner, at Ethan's deliberate puns, or Lily's elaborate imaginary games. She painted her nails bright red, bought herself a sharp new blazer, and noticed, for the first time in ages, how strangers would sometimes hold her gaze just a second longer than necessary. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the house rang with a gentle hush, Emma stood at the window and allowed herself to hope. The future was not clear. It wasn't safe or guaranteed or even necessarily kind, but it belonged to her. She was rediscovering strengths that lay dormant under years of sacrifice and heartache. She would use them not only to survive, but to pursue the justice and recognition she so richly deserved. In that quiet, golden hour, Emma closed her notebook. She was ready, finally and entirely, to begin again. Kindling the flame. Emma sat by the window late into the night, a mug of cold tea in her hands, staring out into the darkness. The sense of quiet purpose she had been nurturing during her months of recovery had matured, taking a new and keener shape. The anger that once threatened to consume her now felt edged with intent. She knew, finally and absolutely, that her sacrifices, her years of unwavering loyalty, unpaid labor, and emotional fortitude, would be neither erased nor dismissed. If life had forced her to become a different woman, then she would shape that transformation herself. Emma no longer craved only survival or simple recognition. What she needed now was light, a kindling of justice, agency, maybe even vengeance. And so, with each passing day, she began to carefully lay out the pieces for her reckoning. Quiet intelligence. Emma's campaign started with observation and patience. She became a master of being underestimated. A quiet ex-wife, friendly and polite in public, careful never to hint at the depth of her intentions. She kept her eyes and ears open, nurturing the casual connections forged during her long marriage, other mothers at school, retired neighbors, even an assistant at David's hedge fund who always smiled just a little too knowingly when they ran into each other at the grocery store. Emma collected stories, gleaned timelines, and began building her second, secret notebook, one that documented not her own growth, but the secrets and patterns of David's gilded new world. Financial filings, public company statements, and even casual rumors were all of use. She paid close attention to Jessica's sudden, meteoric promotions and noted discrepancies in David's travel claims. There were oddities, small transfers between company accounts, clients gained in irregular clusters after expensive consulting trips. She made no accusations yet. She simply recorded, cross-checked, and quietly learned the language of financial forensics. Strategic approaches. Emma knew timing would be everything. It was Jessica who presented the most vulnerable thread. Jessica, new to the brutal realities of corporate politics, had spent months basking in David's affections and the reflected glow of promotion. But the pressure in their industry was relentless, and whispers about Jessica's inexperience had begun circulating after a few poorly managed deals. Emma saw an opportunity and approached Jessica with calculated subtlety. At a school function, a spring carnival, bright with streamers and the shouts of children, Emma found herself beside Jessica at the bake sale table. On the surface, their conversation was ordinary. The weather, the chaos of kids, an offhand joke about how exhausting life in grown-up land was. But Emma saw the tension behind Jessica's smile, the way she checked her phone, the brief flashes of irritation when David texted, the nervous glance she gave to a group of whispering moms. Emma leaned in gently. "My first years with David were really tough," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the trays of brownies. "That world asks a lot of you, sometimes more than is fair." Jessica's reply was careful, probing. But for the first time, Emma saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. From then on, Emma made herself sporadically present in Jessica's orbit. Not threatening, not suspicious, just supportive, older, a woman who had once given her entire self to the same ambitious man. She offered small confidences. "David used to keep so much stress bottled up. I thought it was just work." Or, "Don't let anyone make you feel small. Your instincts are probably right." Each interaction planted seeds, tiny, almost invisible doubts about David's honesty and the security of her new position. Fanning the flames concurrently, Emma began tightening the net around David. She contacted an old acquaintance from her marketing days, Sandra, a quietly brilliant data analyst who now did freelance background investigations. Over secret meetings at coffee shops, Emma shared sanitized leads. Sandra helped cross-reference bank statements and conference schedules. When they stumbled on evidence that David's firm appeared to be double-booking advisory fees and shaving profits for illicit kickbacks, Emma felt a rush of chilly satisfaction. She was careful never to act alone. Emma brought her findings to a legal aid group specializing in whistleblower support, slipping in anonymously typed documents, trusting in the slow, inevitable process of compliance reviews and regulatory oversight. Meanwhile, anonymous tips about questionable practices at David's firm began circulating, each one adding pressure, fueling the growing storm beneath the company's gleaming reputation. Emma's nights, once spent in sleepless grief, now became hours of focused work. She set up new passwords, encrypted emails, and even learned the basics of virtual private networks to guard her identity. More than once she feared discovery. Her heart would race as she heard a car pause near her window, or as Lily got up for a glass of water while Emma pored over ledgers and timelines. But she pressed on, sustained by a conviction stronger than fear. Orchestrating ruin. Emma didn't want chaos for chaos's sake. Every step was deliberate. She cultivated goodwill among parents at school and neighbors in her community, helping host a school fundraiser, bringing soup to a sick neighbor, volunteering for local charities. The more she wove herself back into community life as Emma, strong, resilient, and kind, the more she earned the trust needed for allies and cover. Yet the most delicate operation remained, handling her children's reality. Emma protected Ethan and Lily fiercely, never allowing her bitterness to taint their view of their father outright. But neither did she pretend that all was well.
Over there.
So when Ethan asked why David always came home tense, or why Jessica sometimes cried in the car, Emma listened, reassured, and reminded them, gently, that grown-ups sometimes make mistakes that aren't about the children at all. The tipping point. It was not a single act, but a chain of careful manipulations that set the ultimate fire. Jessica's doubts grew, and in moments of exasperation and suspicion, she confronted David about his late nights and secretive meetings. Word of their arguments leaked quietly into the firm. Simultaneously, compliance officers began sniffing around irregularities, and journalists, alerted by Emma's anonymous soapbox, started to ask sharper questions about the firm's strategies and its leaders' integrity. Emma watched it all unfold, not with vindictive glee, but with a somber satisfaction that justice, however imperfect, could eventually find those who dared to believe themselves above it. The ember of a new self. In the quiet, Emma allowed herself a moment, just a moment, of old pain. She remembered when she had hoped for nothing but family and partnership, and how bitter a thing hope could sometimes be. Now, as she gazed at her children sleeping peacefully down the hall, and as the first tendrils of David's well-protected life began to unravel, Emma realized the flame was never only revenge. This was the spark of her reclamation. The true fire was not destruction. It was her own suffering transformed, at last, into power, into possibility, and into the resolve never to be a bystander in her own life again. The blow of revenge. The first tremors hit quietly, easily missed by those not looking for cracks beneath the surface. For David and Jessica, however, the shift was as sudden and jarring as an unexpected storm. At first, there were just whispers in hallways, strange questions from compliance officers, an email flagged for review, a canceled business lunch that no one seemed to want to explain. Confidence, once David's birthright, now felt tenuous. Every click of his phone ushered a new pulse of worry. Jessica felt it too. Her rapid ascent, once the subject of admiration and envy, was now a magnet for scrutiny. Colleagues who used to smile at her in the morning averted their eyes. A few even stopped talking when she entered the elevator. The world that had welcomed her alongside David, cheering her success, now closed its doors with polite, chilly efficiency. Alone at her sleek desk, Jessica scrolled through firm-wide memos, searching for any clue that could make sense of the sudden change in atmosphere. At home, the energy between David and Jessica shifted from playful, ambitious partnership to brittle anxiety. Jessica, who once delighted in sharing wine and whispered plans with David on the balcony, now started to question, sometimes aloud, just how much she really understood about the man she'd upended her life for. Their arguments, once rare, became a nightly ritual, hushed, tense, and never quite resolved. Jessica accused David of hiding things. David, exasperated and raw, would bark that she should trust him. Neither did. Simultaneously, Emma remained the picture of calm resilience, a quiet force in the community, never speaking ill of her ex-husband, always gracious to Jessica in public. If she was bitter, she never showed it. Instead, Emma was remarkably composed at school events, arranging cupcakes for Lily's class or cheering Ethan on from the soccer field, with poised encouragement. People admired her, even if they didn't know her full story. If there were whispers about David's new life, Emma never participated. She simply let people come to their own conclusions. But beneath her composed exterior, Emma was marshaling every skill, every ounce of emotional intelligence she'd gained in the battlefield of her marriage and divorce. She maintained her network, listening, but never volunteering information. She made herself indispensable in PTA projects and neighborhood drives, ensuring she was present but never overbearing. Parents and teachers alike began favoring her side in custody exchanges and small talk. She was not just a woman scorned. She was increasingly seen as the heart and conscience of her small community, and more importantly, as someone who had been wronged but risen above. David began to sense the tide turning against him. Where his words and status had once bent conversations, he now encountered skepticism. A questioning glance here, a clipped greeting there. When news stories about misconduct investigations in the hedge fund sector began appearing online, David tried to brush them off as generic industry headaches. But the headlines grew sharper, more pointed. Unnamed sources, anonymous leaks, and cautious coverage about his firm's unorthodox financial maneuvers. At first, David was convinced he could manage it all. He called in favors, met with lawyers late into the night, issued stern memos insisting on silence among his staff. But the more he tried to control the narrative, the less control he actually had. The regulatory floodgates opened, a slow drip at first, and then suddenly a surge. Auditors appeared at his office, all business and no small talk. David's phone rang nonstop, each call more urgent than the last, asking for explanations about discrepancies, about Jessica's role, about his own travel and spending. Jessica was not spared. Her presence, once an asset, had become a liability. Some gossiped that she was merely a pawn. Others accused her of complicity. Jessica's friends in the office avoided her gaze, and long, awkward silences replaced the easy banter of months past. She tried to defend herself, but every attempt only deepened her isolation. The world she'd been so proud to enter was now expelling her, piece by piece. For the first time, Jessica found herself wishing for the old days when she was anonymous, safe in the margins, not exposed by the harsh light of scandal. The private rupture between David and Jessica deepened with every headline and suspicious glance. David, under immense pressure, lashed out in desperation, accusing Jessica of betraying him, of being careless, of undermining the trust he claimed to have placed in her. Jessica, wounded and angry, retaliated, calling out David for his secrecy, his ambition, his disregard for the human cost of his rise to power. Their partnership, built on a mutual desire for more, was now reduced to distrust and mutual blame. Meanwhile, Emma watched from a distance, her hands steady even as her heart pounded at each new revelation that found its way into the public eye. Justice, she realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it advanced quietly, steadily, like rain soaking into the earth. She neither gloated nor despaired. Instead, Emma focused her energy on protecting her children from the worst of the fallout, fielding their questions with compassion, counseling them through confusion and hurt, reminding them that grown-up mistakes should never define a child's worth. As David's professional life unraveled, friends who had once flocked to his parties and sought his counsel now kept their distance. Invitations dried up. Investors called in angry demands. Old business partners scheduled quiet coffees, not to help, but to politely withdraw. The fault lines in his career were now visible to all, his once vaunted reputation crumbling beneath the weight of public mistrust and private betrayal. Jessica, too, felt the loss in every part of her life. Her social feed, once flooded with congratulatory messages and likes, turned cold and quiet. Friends stopped answering calls, colleagues forgot to invite her to meetings. The woman who believed she'd won the prize now wondered if it was all ash. Her career, her confidence, her sense of belonging all sacrificed to a hollow pursuit. Watching David's world collapse made her feel more alone than ever, filled with regret for both her choices and her complicity. Emma, reflecting on the storm she'd set in motion, found a complex mix of emotions within herself. There was satisfaction, an undeniable thrill at seeing her years of sacrifice and suffering finally recognized, at David being forced to confront consequences he'd once believed would never touch him. There was also pain for her children, for Jessica's isolation, even for the boyish version of David she'd once loved. Most of all, there was clarity. Revenge was not vindication. It was a reckoning, a demand that suffering not be ignored, but balanced, at last, by the truth. As headlines multiplied and the gossip swirled, Emma returned to her private rituals, caring for Ethan and Lily, tending to her job, helping neighbors without fanfare. She had struck her blow not in anger, but in the quiet insistence on dignity. Whatever bitterness remained was tempered by the knowledge that she did not destroy to win, but to reclaim what was hers, her pride, her agency, her place in the world. And as life moved forward, it was with the keen knowledge that justice had found its mark, and that from the ashes of betrayal, a new beginning would rise. The collapse. The collapse did not come all at once, but rather like a slow-motion catastrophe. Every choice, every betrayal, every overlooked warning finally converging in a sequence of devastating events that no one could mistake for anything but final. For David, the unraveling became impossible to contain. It started with a letter on crisp regulatory letterhead. The Securities and Exchange Commission had opened a formal investigation into fraudulent activity at his firm. At first, David paced the polished halls of his office with a forced calm, convincing himself this was a minor snag, another bureaucratic nuisance that money and influence could quiet. But this time, Everyone was looking. Too many emails were being subpoenaed, too many auditors leafing through records, too many journalists calling for comment. As the headlines grew louder, David watched everything he had so ruthlessly pursued become ammunition against him. A reporter's microphone thrust into his face outside the courthouse, stinging questions about embezzlement, kickbacks, shell companies. The bank called late at night, politely but firmly requesting a meeting to discuss the status of your accounts. Investors demanded the return of their capital. The board convened, not with the reverence of old, but with steely eyes and veiled threats. By Friday, the news was public. David Brown had been removed from his position as CEO, pending legal review. Home became a war zone. His phone, so long a symbol of power, now only delivered bad news. Subpoenas, hostile texts, missed calls from old friends who were unable to comment. The media parked outside his house in anonymous black vans. Each night, David sat alone at his kitchen table, neat stacks of legal documents in front of him, searching for any route of escape from the avalanche he had set in motion. He thought about calling Emma, if only to seek a familiar voice in the chaos. But shame and pride tied his tongue. Jessica's fall was less public, but no less total.
It's worse than we thought.
Within weeks of the first articles, her inbox filled with impersonal HR notices and canceled meetings. Her mentor, once eager for lunch and career advice, now walked briskly past her in the hall. Lunchroom conversations quieted when she entered. Colleagues suddenly remembered another meeting. Rumors flew. Had Jessica known about the illicit deals? Was her promotion just a cover? She tried to defend herself, but the tides had shifted. Even those who once envied her now recoiled. Many were scrambling to distance themselves from the entire scandal. Jessica's personal life crumbled just as rapidly. David was irritable and suspicious, alternating between desperate promises and cold accusations. He stormed through their apartment, snapping at minor things. A misplaced receipt, a phone call not answered quickly enough, her nervous pacing. "You don't trust me," he accused. Jessica, exhausted and heartsick, answered quietly, "Do you even trust yourself?" The children felt the aftershocks in ways they could barely express. Ethan, once easygoing and open, became silent and withdrawn. He avoided phone calls from his father, unsure how to reconcile the man in the news with the one who used to toss him baseballs in the yard. Lily grew clingier, her nightmares returning, her anxious eyes seeking reassurance that her mother would never disappear. Emma, heartsore but resolute, held them close. She fielded awkward questions at school. "Is it true about your dad?" Guided them through uncertain routines, and consoled them through evenings that sometimes ended in tears. Emma watched it all unfold from her rebuilt home with a complex ache. There was vindication. Yes, the justice she fought for had come not as a sharp blow, but as a slow, inescapable reckoning for those who had believed themselves untouchable. She watched the televised hearings in the evening with the volume low, her hands clenched under the table. In David's face, she saw a flicker of the man she once loved. Proud, afraid, unmoored by the consequences of his own ambition. But the satisfaction was mingled with sorrow. Emma knew, firsthand, the cost of collapse, the displacement of children, the withering of public respect, the spiral of financial losses and legal fees. She fielded calls from reporters who wanted a bitter soundbite, but Emma refused every time. She had nothing to add to the pile of accusation. The truth, in all its clarity, was public record now. Neighbors who had once pitied her now looked at Emma with new eyes. The school principal stopped her one day after drop-off. "If you ever want to talk, or if the kids need extra support, let us know." Friends invited her for coffee, some for the first time since the divorce. There was no gloating in Emma's acceptance. Instead, a quiet gratitude for the return of trust and dignity. Jessica, for her part, tried to rebuild, applying for jobs far from finance, using her maiden name, seeing a therapist for anxiety and shame she'd never felt before. Sometimes, on her way out of the supermarket, Emma would see Jessica across the parking lot, shoulders squared under invisible weight. There was no animosity, only a wary acknowledgement, and the awareness that both women had been transformed by choices that neither could fully regret nor fully forgive. David entered a long legal battle. Former colleagues testified. Investigators combed through years of records. The story became a cautionary tale in business school casebooks and Saturday op-eds. How pride blinds, how greed corrupts, how networks crumble under the weight of hubris. Eventually, after endless motions and counterclaims, sentences and settlements, David was convicted on several counts of fraud and securities violations. The sentence wasn't the maximum, but the verdict was final. Cameras caught him leaving the courthouse, pale and gaunt, not the master of the universe he once fancied, but a man shaped and shattered by his own undoing. And in the gentle aftermath, Emma allowed herself at last to breathe. The world did not right itself overnight, but the air grew lighter with each passing week. She watched Ethan and Lily find their new rhythms. She hosted small dinners with friends. She allowed herself to hope that love, real love, honest and whole, might find her once more. She knew the cost of survival. She mourned the ideal she had once believed in. But Emma walked forward with the hard-won grace of someone who understood that collapse, for all its devastation, could also clear space for new growth. In the ruins of greed and betrayal, she found herself, restored, resilient, unafraid. Forgiveness. Time, Emma found, had its own way of smoothing even the deepest wounds. In the months that followed David's collapse and public disgrace, the world around her seemed to catch its breath. For Emma, each day was a negotiation between memory and possibility, a delicate balancing act between honoring all that she had lost and embracing all that might yet come. Forgiveness, she realized, was not a single act. It was a process as slow and stubborn as the scar tissue that forms over a deep injury. For so long, Emma had anchored herself in the logic of pain. It was pain that had motivated her to act, pain that had sharpened her senses and given her the clarity to fight for herself and for her children. But as the dust settled and the edges of her anger dulled, she found herself waking into a quieter, uncertain landscape where hate was simply too heavy to carry. Some mornings, when the pale light crept into her bedroom, Emma would lie still and listen to Ethan's even breathing down the hall and the faint tinkling of Lily's laughter as she played with her dolls. In these small moments, so ordinary they might have been invisible, Emma felt something loosen within her. The world, in its resilience and routine, beckoned her to let go. It started with forgiving herself. She looked back on the long years of sacrifice, her career abandoned, friendships left to wither. Small and large indignities suffered in the name of love and family. Where once she had berated herself for those choices, now Emma tried to see the woman she had been with compassion. She understood that her dedication, even if costly, had been born from hope, not foolishness. The acts of love that had once left her hollow now seemed, in retrospect, marks of her courage and generosity. Forgiving herself meant believing she was worthy of new happiness, despite the darkness she'd weathered. With her children, the work of forgiveness was gentler, but more painstaking. Ethan had become quieter, a little older than his years, his eyes sometimes shadowed with questions too complicated for words. Emma practiced patience, never pushing him for conversations he wasn't ready to have. She took him to baseball games, let him vent his anger in silent drives along tree-lined roads, sat side by side with him on the porch as dusk fell and the cicadas began their summer chorus. Bit by bit, the old trust returned. Lily, too, required constant reassurance. Forgiveness for her was woven into 1,000 assurances. Nighttime hugs, pancakes made into smiley faces, gentle reminders that love did not vanish with a parent's mistakes. Forgiving David was hardest of all. At first, Emma had simply refused to speak to him beyond what was strictly necessary for the children. A text about school drop-off, a brief phone call about doctor's appointments. The damage he'd inflicted, the betrayals, the legal maneuvers, the abandonment, felt like wounds that would never fully close. Yet over time, she came to see the heavy price he had paid. The newspapers no longer cared about his downfall, but the consequences lingered. Professionally disgraced, relationships shattered, reputation in tatters.
Pleasure to work with you.
Likewise.
Once,
Nice.
she would have savored the image of David brought low. But now she saw only a man, utterly defeated
Excuse me, I couldn't
by his
help but
own
notice
pride
you.
and greed. One afternoon, months after the courtroom drama
was a
faded
difficult
from the
time for me.
headlines, David appeared at Emma's door.
You can trust me.
He was thinner, lines of fatigue carved deep into his face, humility replacing the arrogance that had once seemed a permanent part of him. He spoke quietly, not to excuse himself, but to thank Emma for taking care of the children, for carrying the burdens he had cast aside, for enduring. "I'm sorry," he said at last, and in his voice, Emma heard a truth that was neither evasive nor self-serving. It was simply the recognition of harm done and a hope, however faint,
Quite impressive
for
how
peace.
you always manage to come out on
Emma
top,
would
isn't
never
it?
forget what she had suffered, but standing there, watching her children race across the grass of the front
There's a rumor
yard
going
as
around
autumn
about Emily.
leaves swirled
Can
around
you
them,
tell me anything
she
about
felt
that?
no hunger for
I'm
revenge.
not sure what you mean.
She didn't absolve David completely.
Okay,
Some
David,
things
let's
could
do
not be
this.
erased, but she chose, in that moment, to stop wishing him further pain. "Let's do better for them," she replied quietly, nodding to Ethan and Lily. It wasn't reconciliation. It was the first tentative act of letting go. She found herself applying that same grace to Jessica when their paths inevitably crossed. Jessica, robbed of her ambitions and friends, bore her own punishment far heavier than any public humiliation. There was an awkwardness when they met in the supermarket aisles
No.
or at a school open house, but also unspoken understanding. Emma viewed her not as a villain or rival, but as another casualty of David's ambition and their shared folly. She offered a smile, small and tentative, which Jessica returned with relief and gratitude. Compassion, Emma realized, required more strength than anger ever had.
That's
With
what Sarah
forgiveness,
knew, right?
Emma's world began to expand again. She rekindled friendships she'd neglected, this time with a depth and honesty she hadn't dared before. She accepted invitations to coffee and allowed herself laughter that wasn't tinged with bitterness. The home, once filled with the echoes of loss, became a place for new beginnings. Pizza nights with Ethan's baseball
that?
team,
See what?
afternoon sunlight spilling across unfinished jigsaw puzzles, late-night conversations with friends who saw not just the survivor, but the woman learning to thrive. Emma did not pretend that forgiveness erased the past. Scars remained, a wariness in her heart, certain disappointments that would never fully dim. Yet she chose to believe that letting go was not about forgetting, but about making space inside herself for something better. She was no longer defined by what she had lost, or by the pain others inflicted. Her life was, at last, her own.
I don't know what
A
to
story
say.
marked by struggle, yes, but also by the grace of moving forward. As the seasons changed and the world spun on, Emma taught herself and her children that healing wasn't a destination, but a daily choice. In every small gesture of kindness, every shared meal, every moment of hope, forgiveness, burned quietly and resiliently. lighting their way forward. And so, liberated from the chains of resentment, Emma stepped boldly into her future, not erasing her scars, but carrying them as proof of both survival and the extraordinary power of letting go.